White House in Washington, top defense officials of the nation gather to discuss the gravest world crisis since Poland and Pearl Harbor. The flagrant aggression of Chinese communist troops in Korea arouses the country's ire. With the North Korean bandits well under control and with the promise that UN troops would be withdrawn, the unexpected entry of 300,000 Red Chinese across the Manchurian border may well precipitate World War III. President Truman voices his accusation of Red imperialism.
The forces of the United Nations are in Korea to put down an aggression that threatens not only the whole fabric of the United Nations, but all human hopes of peace and justice. If the United Nations yields to the forces of aggression, no nation will be safe or secure. If aggression is successful in Korea, we can expect it to spread throughout Asia and Europe and to this hemisphere. We are fighting in Korea for our own national security and survival. We have committed ourselves to the cause of a just and peaceful world order through the United Nations. We stand by that commitment.
On the battlefront in Korea, United Nations forces fight desperately to meet the Red attack. Here, our troops must face what General MacArthur has termed a new war. Outnumbered more than 2 to 1 by Chinese and North Koreans, the UN forces hope to regroup and to meet the overwhelming attack which has broken their fluid lines of defense across northern Korea. The president has stated that the use of the atomic bomb is being considered to halt the communist onrush inspired by Russia. His hope is that the employment of this devastating weapon will be unnecessary, but the final hope lies with the United Nations. At a momentous meeting at Lake Success, the Red Chinese delegation from Peking hear themselves charged with every crime on the calendar of aggression by Ben C. Lim, representative of the Republic of Korea. While Mr. Lim talks, the delegation, whose hordes are threatening world peace, refuse to take their seats and face their accuser.
I point my finger at these representatives of the Chinese communist regime, and I ask, why do they come here with unclean hands? I ask again, why does this group come here with the hands that drip with the blood of the United Nations troops, the blood of the Korean people?
Blocking a United Nations motion to order communist Chinese armies to leave Korea, the Russians used 3 vetoes. On each of the votes, Russia's Jacob Malik was the only dissenting voice. The United States, represented by Chief Delegate Warren Austin, took up the debate and further accused the Chinese Reds of aggression in Korea.
It is no exaggeration to say that that problem is the gravest one now confronting the world. That problem is this: will there be peace or war in the Far East? The world awaits anxiously the answer to this question.
From the Greco-Yugoslavian border come heartwarming scenes of reunion, marking a new era of peace in one sector of the Balkans. Red Cross officials arranged the release of Greek children kidnapped by Red guerrillas during the civil war in Greece and held for ransom in Yugoslavia. But now friendly relations are symbolized by this offer of water. Tito's Yugoslavia, now split with Moscow, has agreed to send home thousands of helpless pawns caught up in the whirlpool of communist hate and imperialism. One of the children expresses thanks to Colonel de Mayor of Switzerland, president of the International Red Cross, as the happy youngsters cross the border that separated them from home and loved ones. Apples and oranges bring smiles to their young faces and smiles to the hearts of free men who see decency and justice prevail in one small corner of a troubled world. Another prisoner is released from Tokyo's war criminal penitentiary, where Premier Tojo was executed for his war crimes. Colonel Davis, commanding officer of the prison, bids farewell to Mamoru Shigemitsu, paroled by General MacArthur after serving 4 years of his term. It was on that momentous occasion in September 1945 that Shigemitsu arrived to head the Japanese delegation, which surrendered aboard the battleship Missouri. It was his signature that headed the list and ended the final phase of World War II. Japan's wartime foreign minister returns to his home. His release by General MacArthur was strongly protested by the Soviet Union. The Russians said that Shigemitsu's parole was illegal and arbitrary, but later the State Department confirmed the Supreme Commander's authority. 20,000 fans jammed the Sports Palace in Paris for a 10-round non-title bout between France's Gene Stock and Sugar Ray Robinson of New York. A body blow hurts the Frenchman, but he holds on gamely against the welterweight champ who's making his European debut. Clubbed to the canvas by a sharp left jab. But he comes back for more, and if there's any doubt about the outcome, it's not shared by the fight fans. Sugar Ray's punishing blows to the body floor the Frenchman a second time. Dazed and dumbfounded by the fury of his adversary's attack, Stock still manages to get a grip on himself and get up at the count of 7. He's down a third time at 2 minutes of the second round. Again, the referee starts his count, and again, the plucky Frenchman manages to stagger to his feet. But then his manager throws in the towel. His man has had enough. And for Sugar Ray Robinson, his Continental debut is a huge and speedy success.
A heavyweight hoopster does a belly buster without blowing his cool. Whew, this kind of work builds up a terrific appetite.
Will there be peace or war?
The fateful question posed by Warren Austin, head of the United States delegation to the UN, set the mood of the world at the century's halfway mark. The seating of nationalist China's delegate on the Security Council precipitated a clash between the free nations and the Soviet bloc, which only ended with the abrupt departure of Jacob Malik, head of the Red delegation, a blunder they were to regret when the invasion of South Korea by North Korean Reds came up for consideration by the Council. In the absence of Soviet obstruction, the Security Council voted overwhelmingly in favor of armed intervention to protect the Korean Republic. It was the first police action sanctioned against an aggressor by the Parliament of Nations. In 1950, men throughout the world learned to look on the brutal face of communism. Berlin, powder keg of Europe, saw a mass demonstration of indoctrinated young Germans on May Day. France was also beset by communist-inspired strife. Red Union members adopted violent methods to prevent the unloading of Marshall Plan aid. And across the world in Japan, America's stronghold in the Pacific, the busy commies were at it again. Students went on a rampage in Tokyo with something less than successful results when opposed by Japanese police aided by occupation military police. But far more sinister to Americans was home front communism. Union Square in New York was the backdrop for these scenes of red violence. From their ranks will come the saboteurs, spies, and subversives should World War III be forced upon America. Underlining the menace from within was Valentin Gubichev, who received secret documents from Judith Kaplan, government employee. This Soviet functionary in the United Nations was deported following his conviction. But there was worse to come. A highly trained and well-equipped North Korean army swarmed across the 38th parallel to attack unprepared South Korean defenders. Caught off guard, they were all but overwhelmed until the United Nations took its historic vote to intervene. While the Korean Republicans fought a desperate delaying action, a United Nations police force with General Douglas MacArthur as commander-in-chief was formed. During the early days of UN action, General MacArthur fought a grim defensive battle. His troops outnumbered 3 and 4 to 1. Stubbornly, forces under his command clung to a shrinking beachhead in Southeast Korea, and for months the Allies fought to keep from being driven into the sea. This, a savage war of attrition in which no quarter was given by a foe equipped with the latest Russian armament. It was, in fact, a war of survival to gain time. The cost was high to Americans who bore the brunt under the UN banner. For here they faced an enemy who ruthlessly slaughtered prisoners, many with their arms bound. Scores died before red guns as they stood helpless. Yes, the cost to free men came hideously high as they bought time on the rapidly narrowing perimeter of their defense. In the first months of conflict, casualties mounted with terrifying speed. But 12 nations had rallied to the United Nations banner. High on the list was Canada, which organized a special brigade of crack troops for duty wherever they might be sent by the United Nations. Thousands left for staging areas in the United States before embarking for the Korean front. With help of this kind, plus air contingents and ground forces from other nations, the tide seemed to have turned when a brilliant strategic move was made in the amphibious landing at Incheon, port city of Seoul. Between 35 and 40,000 men were landed behind the enemy's lines in an operation executed without a hitch. Seemingly, the war had reached a turning point as the fresh troops started an encircling move of the North Koreans. Well armed and equipped, they moved steadily forward toward the Manchurian border under an air cover that hammered incessantly at North Korean supply lines and industrial centers. History may well record that air power spelled the difference between victory and defeat in the opening phases of the struggle. Fair weather and foul, they ranged the skies round the clock, bombing and strafing. The end of the war seemed in sight as the Allies pushed north toward the North Korean capital of Pyongyang and further northward to the Manchurian and Siberian borders. Then it happened. The Chinese Red Armies, numbering hundreds of thousands, swarmed over the frontier against thinly held United Nations positions. Confronted by overwhelming numbers, UN armies were forced into inevitable retreat, while men wondered whether Red China would touch off World War III. Again fighting a delaying action, UN troops paid heavily in casualties. Facing a foe that often outnumbered them 10 to 1, the Allies gave ground slowly, marching through temperatures that sometimes reached 20 below zero. 20,000 trapped near the Chosin Reservoir slogged and fought their way 60 bitter miles to the evacuation port of Hungnam. Through snow-clad mountains and icy passes, they held off 200,000. Would the atom bomb be the answer to the Chinese hordes? President Truman said that it was under consideration. On his word alone rested the decision to unleash this awful force. The world shuddered at the thought, for this catastrophic weapon struck fear in the minds of men all over the world. It mushroomed into the symbol of modern destruction. This man had devised. And in the year 1950, its power edged ever closer to him, leaving death in horrible form in its wake. Its harvest of misery would be limitless, sparing no one. It might well mean a world of men ever fleeing its fury, a world in which no one might again find peace and security. With troubled hearts and minds, men turned to the solace of religion and prayer. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims thronged to Rome for Holy Year. As ominous events crowded the mid-century, 5 short years after a devastating war, men of all faiths prayed for peace. And while man hoped for salvation, he could also work for it through the framework of his world parliament, the United Nations, symbol of man's hope for tomorrow.
A new housing development near Denver, Colorado shows the nation's first model homes with built-in fallout shelters. The room is designed with an atomic war in mind. But behind each 8-inch thick reinforced concrete wall, it may prove to be just what the harried housewife is looking for when life with the kids gets too hectic. This model is equipped for a long stay, for minimum comfort and maximum protection. Bunk beds conserve space, and battery and hand-powered equipment is there. This crank-driven air blower will help in case electric lines are down. Civil defense officials approve. Let's hope it proves to be nothing more than an extra room.
Tension grows, Moscow is the scene of Prime Minister Stalin's birthday, and from all satellite nations, communist followers pay homage to the high priest of Marxism. Here on his 70th birthday, Stalin rules the hardcore of world communism, which has divided the world into two armed camps. Proof of this division is the unrest evidencing itself in other parts of the world. Here, communist marchers are rioting in Tokyo. Both American and Japanese police are obliged to adopt stern measures after one GI has been injured. Elections have given the commies only one seat in the parliament, which may outlaw the party altogether. The demonstration was timed to precede the election, which gave the party supporting General MacArthur's policies an overwhelming majority. What they can't accomplish in a free election, they attempt by violence. Berlin, too, is the scene of smoldering communist unrest. Western occupation forces go on a round-the-clock alert, ready for the communist youth push that would put the entire city in Soviet hands. For weeks, the red sector is kept aflame with every propaganda device in the commie repertoire. On the appointed day, as the parade gets underway, Berlin steels itself for violence. The vaunted gathering of 500,000 dwindles as the conquest of Berlin resolves itself to insults to the Western powers. When 4 ammunition-laden barges blew up in New Jersey's Raritan River, with a roar heard for 40 miles, the once prosperous and industrial town of South Amboy was left a shattered wreck. 4 dead were taken from the ruins, and 22 barge crewmen vanished completely as the city of 10,000 crumbled under the blast. Hardly a home or business building was left undamaged. Declared a disaster area, the city is put under martial law and barred to all but rescue workers. The largest active volcano in the world, Mauna Loa, spills a record volume of red-hot lava on the Golden Isle of Hawaii. The molten stream moves relentlessly from the fiery cone 13,000 feet above the sea, and scores of earthquake shocks accompany the outpouring. The deadly pattern streams down the flanks of Mauna Loa, a continuing menace to life and property. 5 long, desperate weeks, the Canadian city of Winnipeg has battled the swollen waters of the Red River. More than 50,000 volunteer workers man the dikes to hold back the raging torrent. The Red Cross and RCAF transport more than 2,500 patients to safety. Almost 1/3 of the population are forced to abandon their city and flee to shelter in other areas. Total cost of the damage to Winnipeg is estimated in the millions. White Sands, New Mexico, a special camera is installed in a V-2 rocket for flight into the stratosphere. These remarkable pictures made by the Department of Defense show what the Earth looks like from 20 miles up. Seconds later, at 58 miles, the curvature of the Earth appears with the rocket ripping through the air at 2,000 miles per hour. 500,000 throng St. Peter's Square, where Pope Pius officiates at the first outdoor canonization ceremony in Catholic Church history. Maria Goretti, whose preserved remains lie in state at the Vatican, becomes saint of the Church. Catholic pilgrims gather to revere the 11-year-old girl who was stabbed to death and on her deathbed prayed for her assassin. The United Nations forces stage a surprise invasion on the west coast port of Incheon in one of the most brilliant strategic moves of the Korean conflict. Marines swarm into landing craft for the invasion that will be an end run behind the North Korean lines. Under cover of a continuous barrage of rocket fire, the landing craft head for shore. They face an unknown strength in the Incheon garrison. Once again, the Marines are sticking their leather necks out. planes hit the beach, they land almost without opposition. This thrust has taken the Red Koreans completely by surprise. A few die-hard Reds, however, need to be flushed out. General MacArthur pays a surprise visit to the Incheon front to observe personally the brilliant achievement. He sees the results of perfect planning. It is a well-pleased general who issues a well done to his men. UN forces lose no time in their drive on Seoul. This is to be the turning point of the war. But even though the tanks blast their way through opposition, the going is not easy, and there is a price that must be paid for the victory. UN artillery is deadly effective, guided by the spotter pilot. He gives the range, a direct hit. These films give a vivid picture of the grimness of this struggle. Every device known to modern warfare is used in the police action among the rice paddies of Korea. In 17 days after the Incheon landing, South Korean troops crossed the 38th parallel. The mighty battleship Missouri, her 16-inch guns rising to firing position, carries out her United Nations mission along the Korean coast. The big boys are ready for action to soften up enemy strong points. The target is zeroed in, and they let loose. These are the monsters that have spearheaded amphibious landings that have led to successful encircling movements. Shore batteries reply and score a near miss. A giant among sea giants, the Big Mo, puts in her wallop against the red aggressors. Tiny Wake Island. Here it was that a handful of Marines stood off Jap attacks for days. And here it is that President Truman, after an 8,000-mile flight, has his first meeting with General MacArthur, whom he has come to consult on the progress of the Korean War. In a simple radio shack, momentous decisions are reached. Secretary of the Army Pace and Admiral Radford attend the talk with the UN commander, whose allied forces at that moment were converging on the North Korean capital of Pyongyang. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Omar Bradley, is also among the President's advisors. Before they part at the airfield, President Truman pins the 4th oak leaf cluster to the Distinguished Service Medal on a chest that already bears almost every decoration a grateful nation can offer. In an effort to cut off Reds fleeing north to the Manchurian border, the 187th Airborne Regiment and 120 planes prepare for a drop 40 miles north of the Red Korean capital. Personally supervising and observing the operation is General MacArthur, who watches as the paratroopers drift down in a perfectly executed maneuver. In the words of the general, this closes the trap on the enemy. With a Sunday punch landed, the mop-up continues with UN forces soaring north in relentless pursuit of the fleeing North Koreans. Stubbornly resisting Reds had to be blasted out of strong points, leaving behind burning villages, the dead, and the captured. A total of almost 100,000 prisoners have been taken since the tide of battle has turned. A swelling column that heralds victory for the UN in Korea.
The ultimate in do-it-yourself project from the home workshop of 16-year-old Kurt Golden, Arthur the Robot. The second mechanical man built by the Oakland, California high school youth, Arthur represents all of a month's after-school tinkering. The project paid off. Arthur now handles many of Kurt's chores around the house, while the young genius controls operations from the sidelines. Kurt's next step will be to install radio controls and really take it easy while Arthur works. Oops, an accident. Bad aim or something. But was it an accident? Arthur ain't talking. Seems suspicious, though, when the controls are just about foolproof. But Arthur the Robot's a harmless fellow, and uh-oh. Here he comes. This is where we go.